All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. So, we are back continuing our series looking at an urban fantasy rom com and going through the entire process of using the Laterpress story tools to go from an idea to a finished rough draft. Continuing every episode, kind of working on a different element of the process to move this book along. So the very first stream was a high-level overview of different AI tools and going through the idea phase. So if you want to kind of see the whole process from the beginning, go back and watch those earlier streams. I'm trying to show off the whole process of generating the text, and then from there interacting with the text and improving on things, inserting our own voice into it. So, of any of the streams that I have done so far showing off Laterpress story tools, I think this is the episode where you will see me using the AI the least, because there's a lot of it on the front end. If you're working through the new story flow to help with iterating on ideas, you can use it to iterate on. And I'm going to make sure that the outline is showing here to update story beats and to generate the scene cards that help set up the basic context for what it needs to happen in a specific scene, and then generating the scene text to have your rough draft as to here's what happens in that scene. But then you need to take it the next level, dig into the text, review what you've got. Do you like the text? Is there areas of weakness? How can it be improved? To insert your own voice. So in the last episode of our series, we went through a couple chapters of the text here, and I think I must have flipped these. I'm going to flip these back for the moment because I don't recall the logic on why I would have swapped those out. So I might flop them later. But in our last stream, we read through the text that had been generated, and my way of marking up the text was to bold things. Anything that I made in bold text was a specific area where I felt that I could improve upon the text in some way. There were very few things that I just outright deleted early on. I kind of left things alone, but marked areas of territory. And I also used the notes feature here. This notes feature is separate from the wiki. Any notes such as character cards and lore details here, anything that is in here feeds into the story tools as context to inform what gets generated. Anything that is listed in the notes does not. This is just an area where you can place notes for yourself to be able to review anything you want to know without having to leave the editor. And I'm actually even going to go full screen mode so that we have a nice clean editing experience. So just to remind folks, the concept of this story that we're working on is this is an urban fantasy rom-com about two people who get paired up through a magical dating app. Their first date goes horribly, horribly wrong, and they want to go their separate ways, and then they find themselves back where they started. They are trapped in a time loop engineered by the app who will not let them leave until they come to realize that the app is in fact correct and they are a good match for each other. And so the app kind of takes on the role of acting like an antagonist, but it's actually coming from a good place, and it's forcing them to work through their own issues to get to the place where they're ready to have a relationship with each other. And so our first chapter here, our first character is our female protagonist, Tessa, who works as a therapist for people's familiars. And the first chapter is giving her walking through kind of a day in the life for her. It's a session with her in her office. What's up, Samuel? Welcome in. I'm just kind of catching folks up on the status of things here. So, chapter 1 is Tessa in her office having a therapy session for a Phoenix familiar. And in the last session, we read through all of this. We'll probably do a lot of reading through this again, so I mark things up. But then I also put in notes for myself, higher level issues beyond sentence level things that I felt could be improved. And my notes to myself, and I'm glad I did this because, that way I don't have to remember things a week later, was that the generated text lacks an inner monologue. And we may be from Tessa's point of view and following her around, but we see very little of how she actually thinks about things. I remind myself to check the descriptions and see if they can be made more likely or more lively. And here you can see this is a product of me trying to talk and type at the same time because there's spelling error, spelling error, spelling error. I cannot talk and type at the same time. But note number 3, the chapter never specified that Artemis is a cat, nor is their relationship clarified. And in chapter 1, I think that needs to be explained to readers. And following up on getting in Tessa's head, why does Tessa care about dating enough to sign up for an app? Especially because another chapter is going to establish that the cost to use this dating app is a one-time fee of $5,000. So it is not cheap. People who sign up for this app are very much committing, but the app has a greater than 95% success rate. So they can justify that fee because it's an app that actually gets results. So I felt the chapter needs some sort of context to explain why she wants the app. And so now with that kind of established, we're going to start from the top and work our way through the chapter again, really kind of rewriting and looking to revise things as we go. So I may, for some sections, turn to AI for revision suggestions. When it comes to revising with the AI, my experience with it is, how big a revision are you looking to make? How much are you trying to do? The bigger an edit is, like if it's multiple sentences or an entire paragraph, then that's at the range where, it may be worth having AI do a regeneration pass and, try to rewrite something to your specifications. If we're talking about a single sentence, for me, it's always faster to rewrite it myself than to try to get AI to give me a sentence that I like. So, this may end up being more of a writing stream than using an AI stream, but that's why we have in the title Editing and Revising its First Draft of our story idea. So, chapter 1, what needs to happen here is Tessa is mid-session in her cozy plant-filled office in the city of Horizon, seated across from a young Phoenix familiar named Salil, who is in the grip of a full-blown anxiety spiral. The Phoenix's distress manifests physically, tiny embers shed from her plumage with every nervous twitch, singeing the arm of Tessa's therapy couch and leaving faint scorch marks on the cushion. Tessa remains calm and warm, guiding Salil through a grounding exercise while discreetly nudging a fireproof tray closer with her foot. The session reveals the core of Salil's issue. Her bonded human recently started a new relationship, and Salil feels replaced, unsure whether her role as emotional anchor still matters. Tessa validates the familiar's fear. So we're getting kind of the walkthrough on the therapy here. After the Phoenix leaves, trailing a faint smell of wood smoke and looking noticeably lighter, Tessa brushes ember residue off her sleeve, checks her phone, and opens the Cupid app. The screen displays a single message in Cupid's signature sleek, slightly smug font. Match pending. Your patience is appreciated. Artemis, without opening her eyes, says from the windowsill, your heart rate just changed. I can hear it from here. Tessa ignores her and straightens the scorched cushion. That's kind of the overview of the scene. And so now, digging in here, the ember landed on the arm of the therapy couch and glowed there for a full second before Tessa nudged the fireproof tray forward with the toe of her boot, sliding it into position beneath Salil's perch with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this many times before. Now I highlighted practice eased of someone who'd done this many times before because I have found practiced ease feels like it has become an AIism. It likes that one too much. And of someone who've done this many times before, it feels stock. There's not much emotion in here. It's just an acknowledgement that she's done it. What can we have something in here that addresses the concern of a lacking inner monologue? Here's a chance to take an objective statement of what she does and insert some detail about how does she feel about it. So that would be an example of digging in here. And this is why I don't personally do writing streams on my own, because having a camera in your face and thinking about how you're going to write things does change the equation a little bit. I am not practiced at that. Maybe things will get faster as we go. But the practice eased of someone who'd done this many times before. And I should say I'm going to try to elevate the text, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to get it so far as to be of publishable quality. Because again, having camera in face is an interesting dynamic. But the idea is to make it better than it was before, right? Bring some personality into it. Sliding into the position beneath Salil's perch. She maintained eye contact with... We don't establish that as a phoenix here in this first paragraph. Okay, so for now, I'm going to leave my changes in bold just so that as we go through this, we have a visual representation of what I am changing. It's also a reminder if I wanted to go back into this again to revise my revisions, I specifically remember what has changed. So I think my last step in the revision process would be to take away the bold. But so I deleted practiced eased, and I have in here now, she maintained eye contact with the phoenix using gestures and a calming voice to divert the familiar's attention away from what she was doing. Some clients felt insulted when she took measures to mitigate property damage. So there's a little bit more in the why is she doing this. I'm establishing in this first paragraph that Salil is a phoenix, so that we have, again, there's more context as to why she's doing this. And now because I have put in, calming voice here, I would get rid of keeping her voice low and even here because that's now redundant. So I want you to try something for me, Tessa said. Can you name 3 things you can feel right now? Not emotions, physical sensations. Salil's plumage rippled, sending cascades of tiny sparks down her breast feathers. She was small for a phoenix, barely larger than a cockatiel, and young enough that her fire hadn't settled into the deep golds and crimsons of maturity. Right now, she was all anxious oranges and flickering yellows, her talons gripping the edge of the couch cushion hard enough to leave print pick scorch marks in the upholstery. And I'm going to note here, because again, I thought that this lacks inner monologue. I'm going to put here, that would be a space to insert what Tessa's thinking about that. But for now, I want to carry through to address some other issues with the chapter. The cushion, Salil said. Her voice is thin, was high and thin, a sound like a match being struck under my feet and air from the vent. It's cold on my left wing. That's good. That's two. One more, because we need to describe three things. Salil's head twitched, bird-like and wrapped. I think I would just delete that right there. We've established that Salil is a phoenix, so of course its movements are going to be bird-like. I don't need that. My chest, it's tight. It's like something's sitting on it. Okay, that's your body telling you something. Can you stay with that feeling for a second? You don't have to fix it. Just notice it. And again, we're in therapy speak, which I generally don't like it when characters do, except that this is literally a scene in a therapist's office. So therapy speak is appropriate for this specific situation because we've called for it. Another ember dropped. It hit the tray this time, hissing softly against the treated metal. On the windowsill behind Tessa's desk, Artemis cracked one eye open, tracked the ember's descent, and closed it again. Now I should have bolded this the first time, because this is the first time in this chapter that Artemis has been mentioned, and we have no context for who Artemis is yet here. I don't yet know, reading through the text, if this is the moment that I want to establish that Artemis is her cat familiar, or let that slide. So I'm going to bold that as a detail to come back to. Salil's wings tucked tighter against her body. It's been like this for weeks, ever since Marin started seeing him. There it was. Tessa didn't lean forward, didn't change her expression. She'd learned early in her practice that familiars could read shifts in body language with almost supernatural precision, which made sense given that reading their bonded human's emotional state was literally what they had been made for. Any sudden movement, any flicker of clinical interest, and Salil would clam up, or worse, start performing distress instead of actually feeling it. That part I don't like. So I think my intent here was, again, this is kind of as close as it gets to inner monologue or thoughts from Tessa in this chapter. If I want to change this, so we could, using default tools, compress this, expand this, rephrase. I made a revision tool in here as well, or use freeform to dictate how it's going to revise this. The rephrase tool sticks pretty close to the actual way things were written. So if you're looking for a wholesale change of how a paragraph is written, that is not probably the best tool. Revision is going to work better. All right, so how do we want to revise this? Actually, hold on, I want to reread the setup for it again. So another ember drops. Okay, yeah, so our Phoenix is getting to the crux of their issue. Ever since Marin started seeing a man, now we're nervous. She didn't. Okay. I think I know where I'm going with this now. So revision tool. Oh, I accidentally hit the caps button. I want this paragraph to read as more detailed and clinical. Show us Tessa's experience with familiars provide additional logic and reasoning for why Tessa believes moving in could, what's the word I'm looking for? Halt the conversation, could complicate the conversation, or cause Salil to close herself off. All right, so there I have explained my intent for what I want. I'm going to copy that just in case. And let's generate and see what it gives us for a revision. All right, so it replaces that paragraph with Tessa didn't lean forward, didn't change her expression, didn't so much as shift her weight in the chair. Familiars were built to be emotional seismographs. Their entire neurology was organized around detecting micro shifts in their bonded human's affect, which meant they'd evolved a secondary sensitivity to any humanoid body language that signaled heightened intention. A forward lean read as pursuit, a widening of eyes read as alarm. Even a subtle change in breathing rhythm could register as a spike in arousal or interest, and a familiar in crisis would interpret that spike in one of two ways. Either the therapist had identified something seriously wrong, which would amplify the panic, or the therapist was fascinated by the dysfunction, which would cause the client to pivot from genuine distress into a curated performance of it. Tessa had watched it happen dozens of times in her first year of practice. A familiar mid-breakthrough suddenly catching some flicker of clinical engagement in her posture and shutting down like a door slamming, or worse, escalating into theatrical anguish that looked dramatic but felt nothing. The real stuff was quieter. The real stuff needed stillness around it, the way a flame needs a room without wind. Okay, so this needs revision too, but this is way closer to where I wanted this paragraph to go. So I'm going to replace this, and we're going to get rid of, here's my revised revision for the selected text. Because this is a very long paragraph. Didn't change your fashion. I think I should go, Tessa didn't change her expression, didn't so much as shift her weight in her chair. We're going to condense this a little bit. Familiars were built to be familiars. I don't like built because that feels engineered versus mechanical. Familiars acted like emotional seismographs. Their entire neurology was organized around they excelled at detecting micro shifts in their bonded human's affect, which meant they evolved a secondary sensitivity to any humanoid body language that signaled heightened attention. I think I get rid of these here and go. Even a subtle change in breathing rhythm could register as a spike in arousal or interest, and a familiar in crisis would interpret that spike in one of two ways. Either the therapist had identified something seriously wrong, which would amplify their panic, or the therapist was fascinated by the dysfunction, which could cause the client to pivot from genuine distress into a curated performance of it under the misguided notion that this is what the therapist wanted to see, and the performance would make them happy. Familiars were, after all, natural people pleasers. Well, maybe not. Okay, so I think this I misspelled here. I'm just going to bold that. Talking and typing will never be my strong suit. But so here's what I've done here. Condense this paragraph down a bit. Tessa didn't change her expression, didn't so much as shift her weight in the chair. Familiars acted like emotional seismographs. They excelled at detecting micro shifts in their bonded humans' affect. And molded their behavior in ways intended to please their partner. You forgot to change their to they. Talking about their excelled. What paragraph was that? Okay, there we go. Control F for the win. I see what you're talking about. Familiars acted like emotional seismographs. They excelled at detecting micro shifts in their bonded humans' affect and molded their behavior in ways intended to please their partner. Even a subtle change in breathing rhythm could register as a spike in arousal or interest, and a familiar in crisis would interpret that spike one of two ways. Okay, yep. Familiars were, after all, natural people pleasers. Well, maybe not Artemis. So there's a line I added that is specifically, again, addressing Tessa's inner monologue, which is missing in this chapter. So the well, maybe not Artemis line now establishes that Artemis is a familiar, which we didn't put up earlier, but now this hints that that is the relationship so that the audience is clued into it. We also, this simple little detail establishes that Artemis goes against the typical familiar grain and is not a people pleaser, because Artemis is basically like the Tessa's subconscious coming out. It's all of the thoughts that Tessa would not speak, Artemis will happily word vomit out. So they have an unusual dynamic between them. So that simple line starts to hint at character development. And that's the sort of thing where, again, it's, well, maybe not Artemis. It's 4 words. I added 4 words that set up the character dynamic, explain that Artemis is a familiar, gets in a little bit of character building. That's the kind of thing, a little bit can go a long way with taking the time to assess the text, add your own personality to it. So then here, this was the last half of that revised expansion. She'd watched it happen a dozen times in her first year of practice, a familiar mid-breakthrough, suddenly catching some flicker of clinical engagement in her posture and shutting down like a door slamming, or worse, escalating into theatrical anguish that looked dramatic but felt nothing. That looked dramatic but or worse, escalating into meaningless and counterproductive theatrics. Okay. Revised sentence. She'd watched it happen dozens of times in her first year of her practice. Familiar mid-breakthrough, suddenly catching some flicker of clinical engagement in her posture and shutting down like a door slamming, or worse, escalating into meaningless and counterproductive theatrics. The real stuff was quieter. The real stuff needed stillness around it. The way the flame needs a room without wind. All of that feels like fluff. I'm deleting all of it. Tell me about it, Tessa said. She met someone, a guy from her climbing gym. Salil's talons flexed, leaving fresh marks on the cushion. I think we've already had multiple mentions of cushion. Okay, so we've got 11. The logo is hiding it, but on your screen I did Control F and I typed in the word cushion to see how many times cushion shows up. So we've got cushion, cushion. Those are in the scene card. I don't care. Cushion, cushion, cushion. I want to pay attention to, well, that's only the third time it showed up. So actually that might be fine, and maybe I'm overthinking it. But okay, so here's an example of it very much overusing the word cushion. I'm going to just go ahead and bold those right now, so when we get there, I remember that as a word choice issue. But so far in the chapter, I don't think it's overused at this point. But I wanted to check that. Okay, she met someone, a guy from her climbing gym. Salil's talons flexed. Leaving flash marks on the cushion. I want to say that this bird has probably already left marks. So let's say deepening marks she'd made in the cushion. Deepening the mark. Okay, there's no apostrophe there, but Talons flexed, deepening the marks she'd made in the cushion. Kai, he's fine. He's perfectly fine. He brings her coffee and remembers which oat milk she likes, and he has this stupid nice laugh and a burst of embers bright enough to make Tessa blink. The tray caught most of them. One landed on Tessa's sleeve, and she brushed it off without looking down. Okay, I believe past Nate highlighted a burst of embers because I thought, well, that is a description of what the Phoenix does, that there's an opportunity to make that description more vivid and lively. So I want to try something very, very small. Let's go freeform, text selected, and now instructions. The selected sentence is about a phoenix. I'm explaining this because right now I'm only feeding the AI the selected text for context. So I do need to give it a little bit more to work with. And here I changed modes. You're going to use Sonnet for revisions. I like Opus better. It is a more expensive model, but it's more powerful. And the token difference is going to be pretty trivial for a prompt this small. So I'm just explaining. This selected sentence is about a phoenix familiar who is very nervous in a therapy session and embers erupt from its body as a nervous tick. I want a more vivid and colorful. We'll see how the AI interprets colorful here. Okay, so my guidance is going to be the selected sentence is about a phoenix familiar who is very nervous in a therapy session and embers erupt from its body as a nervous tick. I want a more vivid and colorful description of this happening, which highlights the familiar's anxiety. So I'm acting like an editorial director here, explaining the direction and my intent for how I want this sentence to go. And let's see what it gives me as an option. And now note that it's actually giving me a few options to choose from. So let's let it cook here. Here are some options. A shower of embers erupted from its trembling plumage, hot oranges and desperate reds scattering like sparks from a struck flint, pinging off the metal tray and leaving tiny scorch marks where they landed. Tessa flinched at the brightness. 2. Its feathers rippled and a cascade of embers burst forth in panicked little constellations of amber and vermilion, each one flaring white hot at its center before dying to ash. The tray caught most of them, though a few skittered across the surface like frantic, glowing insects trying to escape. 3. Without warning, a flurry of embers crackled from the phoenix's ruffled down, sputtering erratic like a heartbeat gone wrong, each tiny spark of vivid copper gold that bloomed and died in the same anxious breath. They rained onto the tray with soft, frantic tinks, and Tessa had to shield her eyes from the strobe against the strobe of nervous light. 4. The phoenix shuddered, and ember spilled from it in a fitful, crackling wave, molten golds bleeding into distressed crimsons, popping and hissing against the tray like grease in a too-hot pan. The air shimmered with heat and the acrid sweetness of singed cinnamon, and Tessa blinked against the glare, her eyes watering. So all of these are more descriptive and vivid, which is a change in the right direction. Now, one option here would be to click replace, but what that is going to do is it's going to put all of these, and it's going to put everything it wrote here in the text. And that could be done if I want to take all of it. Actually, I'm going to just select all of this and copy this just in case. I want to save here on my note. And let's create a new note over here in the notes section and copy all of that in here. Because now what I could do is if I click cancel here, all of this text is going to go away, which is why I copied and pasted it into a note here. One thing that could be done if you're in a situation like this where the AI is offering multiple suggestions is to copy this into notes to have like a side workspace. And I could take a sentence from here and a sentence from here and use this space to kit bash, smash together what I like of each of these prompts into one paragraph. If I wanted to, so I can just delete this, but then, copy paste sentences down into here to create a super paragraph and then copy paste that back into here. or I could just, copy one of the specific paragraphs, click cancel, which is going to get rid of all of the text. But once I've copied this into my clipboard, then I just paste in what I want. So that would be one way to do it. So for now, what I want to enter this is, let's go, this note is chapter 1, Phoenix, Ember, Explosion, Options. And I can save this note so I have all of these to refer back to later. I didn't like the insects one. Because I think there's elements of each of these that I would like. For now, to keep things moving along, I'm going to take option 1 and just paste that in here. I'm going to bold that as a reminder to myself. And I'm going to save these so that I have all of those as a note I can refer back to later. So none of my work was lost. Okay, Tessa flinched at the brightness. One landed on her sleeve and she brushed it off without looking down. Okay, now getting back to this. Kai is perfectly fine. He has a stupid nice laugh and she doesn't need me anymore. The words came out small, stripped of the frantic energy that had been driving the session so far, and they sat in the room like something fragile and newly exposed. So this part here that I'm underlining, they sat in the room like something fragile and newly exposed. That feels like AI description to me. That is not my voice. That is not how I speak or describe things. So I flagged this as, okay, we are in a therapy session. We are in a scene where therapy speak is appropriate, but that is not how I would phrase things. So I wanted to make changes here. This is also a moment where this feels pretty bland, and I felt like the emotional intensity of the moment can be dialed up, because we've got this Phoenix familiar finally getting to the crux of why she's so nervous and anxious, that her human partner has a man in his life. He seems perfectly fine, but now our Phoenix feels like her whole reason to exist may be gone. She's unneeded anymore. She's unwanted. She's afraid she's about to get kicked to the curb. That is the emotional heart of it. So can we lean harder into the fact that the Phoenix has just exposed her deepest, darkest fear? And so again, I'm going to whip out the revision tool and give the AI the first crack at seeing how it would make a change based on the specific direction I want to give. So let's say, so Leal has just confessed her deepest fear that her human partner no longer needs her due to finding a man. She worries she no longer has purpose and will soon be set aside. This is the emotional core of this whole That's not the right one. Whole therapy session. Therefore, this paragraph needs to dial up, no, needs to this paragraph needs to recognize the significance of that revelation with Tessa now thinking through how she needs to respond. Balance empathy with how do I want to phrase it? Balance empathy with clinical best practices. Making the paragraph a close insight into how Tessa approaches difficult situations. So you can see there's one, this paragraph is one, it's 2 sentences. I'm looking to replace 2 sentences, and I have written an entire paragraph of directorial intent explaining where I want this to go. So I'm not just, pushing a button and, ooh, AI slot machine go burr. I'm really trying to think through and explain, here's the context, here's what I want, here's why I want it. And now we're going to have it go. And, maybe I love what it's going to come up with, maybe I don't, but it's important to explain what you want and why you want it. Okay, I'm going to let it do its thing. Claude tends to overwrite when you're giving it its revision, but it's easy enough to delete and prune things. So, okay. He's got a stupid nice laugh and she doesn't need me anymore. The words came out small, stripped of the frantic energy that had been driving the session so far, and they landed in the room with the particular weight of something a client had been circling for weeks without knowing it. There it was, the real thing underneath all the ember throwing and the cataloging of Kai's virtue. Not anger, not jealousy, obsolescence. Tessa had heard versions of this fear from dozens of familiars, and it never got easier to sit with because it was never really about the new partner. It was about purpose, identity, the terrifying question of what you are when the thing that defines you shifts shape. Try saying that 10 times fast. Shifts shapes. I'm not even going to try to do it twice fast. The clinical part of her brain was already mapping out the intervention, gently challenged the cognitive distortion, reframe expansion versus replacement, guide Sleal towards testing the belief against evidence rather than letting it calcify into fact. But the other part of her, the part of her that made her good at the work rather than merely competent, knew that none of that would land until Sleal felt heard first, not redirected, not reassured, heard. So Tessa let the silence do what silence does. Okay, I can already see where I'm going to trim this down. So I'm going to pop this in, and let's cut the obvious first. Here's the revision, the revised text, blah, blah, blah. There's the ending to the revised text. So AI loves the rule of 3, and I am also a fan of the rule of 3, of having 3 things to make a point, but it loves it too much. It does it way more than any human author I've ever seen uses that technique. So when I see it, I always feel it needs to work extra hard to justify its existence. Here we go. Here, not anger, not jealousy, obsolescence. Not redirected, not reassured, heard. I mean, automatically one of those needs to die. You can't have two of those going on in the same paragraph. And I also think this is, it's good acknowledgement for a beat. But then you also have to see, here's where the non-revised part picks up. Tessa let the silence hold for a beat, 2 beats, long enough to Salil hear what she'd actually said. So we can get rid of this because we already have silence in the very next paragraph. Words came out small, stripped of frantic energy that had been driving the session so far. I'm going to turn that into one sentence. Stripped of the manic energy that had been driving this session so far. Period. Finally, they'd come to the heart of the issue. Salil had been circling around for weeks. Period. Ooh, no. Yeah, get rid of. So I don't like that where it was the real thing underneath all the ember throwing and cataloging of Kai's virtues, not anger, not jealousy, obsolescence. Let's get rid of this. I believe it would be correct that that is not capitalized here. So I've cut this down to one sentence. Finally, they'd come to the heart of the issue Salil had been circling around for weeks. Obsolescence. Bam. Exactly the heart of the theme. It's trimmed down. We've got to the soul of the matter. Tessa had heard versions of this fear from dozens of familiars. It had never got easier to sit with because it was rarely about a new partner. It was about purpose, identity, and the terrifying question of what you are when the thing that defines you shifts shape. I think there's room. Tessa had heard versions of this fear from dozens of familiars. Period. It never got easier to sit with. Period. It was never really about a new partner. Familiars needed purpose, purpose and identity. Delete. The clinical predator brain was already mapping the intervention, generally challenge the cognitive distortion, reframe it as expansion versus replacement, and guide Salil towards testing the belief against evidence rather than letting it calcify into fact. I might cut that as well too to shorten the sentence, but for now I'm going to let that stand. But the other part of her, the part that made her good at this work rather than merely competent, knew that none of that would land until Salil felt heard first. End of paragraph. Tessa let the silence hold for a beat, 2 beats, long enough to let Salil hear what she'd actually said. Do I like here? Would I say long enough for Salil to process what she'd actually said? I'm gonna go process. She doesn't need you anymore. Tessa repeated, not a question, a mirror. And now this is the reason I highlighted this specifically, and there's more of this in the second chapter as well, is AI's habit of having characters say things, repeat what somebody else just said. And sometimes that is a useful kind of playback, like, do you hear yourself? I have done it as well in my own writing sometimes, but it is almost always incorrect to do it. I think in my entire book, which is like 150,000 word epic fantasy, maybe I did it once or twice, but I consider it almost always a wrong move to repeat the same line of dialogue twice. And we're letting the silence linger for a beat, so I think that entire paragraph gets cut. Sleels, we'll say the phoenix. The phoenix's plumage dimmed. The anxious flickering settled into something lower, a banked cold glow that was somehow harder to look at than the sparks. I'm her emotional anchor. That's what I am. That's my whole purpose. Streamline this. That's my whole purpose. And now she has someone else who makes her feel safe and seen. And her voice cracked, a sound like green wood splitting in a fire. What am I for if she doesn't need that from me? On the windowsill, Artemis's tail flickered once, a slow, deliberate metronome, or a small, deliberate movement like a metronome marking time. I should have bolded this too, because we have established that Artemis is familiar with the words that I added earlier, but not that Artemis is a cat. And this particular paragraph doesn't really add anything to the emotional movement of the scene. It's kind of reminding us that the cat is in the room. So what I would do here, and just given the time, I'm not going to do it now, but I'm going to leave myself a note of my intent. I want a bigger reaction from Artemis here to justify this or cut entirely. Because I still have to think through how involved Tessa's own familiar would be in therapy sessions. Is the therapist is her familiar kind of co-therapist, or is her familiar told to be seen and not heard? Given Artemis's personality, I think seen but not heard is probably the way to go. So actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm just going to cut that. What am I for if she doesn't need that from me? I also like the flow from that question directly into Tessa having to think through how she responds. So Tessa chose her next words carefully, not because she didn't know what to say. She knew exactly what to say. Had with this particular fear in dozens of sessions with dozens of familiars, but because Salil needed to feel found, not fixed. So again, we're leaning too hard into kind of explaining what needs to be done here. And we've also kind of what's the specific point I wanted to call attention to? We've already mentioned here that she's had this I'm not going to find the specific spot when I'm trying to look for it here. We've already established in this chapter that she's had this conversation before with a bunch of other familiars, and that this is a common concern. So I think I'm going to cut all of that down to Tessa chose her next words carefully. And I may go here. This is another spot for a good bit of her thought process on where she will take the conversation. So I don't know that I will act on my own advice there. I could just say Tessa chose her next words carefully and keep the conversation moving. But if I want to address my thought that the chapter needs more inner monologue from her, I'm recognizing this as a good spot to slip that in. So she asks, can I push back on something? Salil's head bobbed. Salil nodded, shortening that. You said Marin doesn't need you anymore, but I think what I'm hearing is Marin's needs are expanding. She's adding a new source of connection to her life. That's not the same thing as replacing an existing one. It feels the same. I know it does, and that feeling is real and it matters, but I want you to sit with a question for a second. Tessa paused, making sure Salil was with her. The Phoenix's dark eyes were fixed on her, unblinking. Has Marin actually pulled away from you, or are you pulling away from her because you're afraid she's about to? Salil opened her beak, closed it, opened it again. I stopped sleeping on her pillow, she said quietly. Last week I moved to the dresser. Why? Because if she's going to choose him, I didn't want to be. Salil stopped, her feathers flattened. Oh, yeah, Tessa said gently. I'm doing it to myself. You're protecting yourself from a loss that hadn't happened, which makes complete sense. Okay, so we've got more therapy here. I'm going to again put a note in here. This is another spot where there is room for some expansion on the Phoenix's body language. Language, perhaps as well. Tessa observing the shift in behavior and recognizing it as a win. Inner monologue. Again, that's a chance. I'm seeing this as an opportunity to slip some more of Tessa into this specific sequence right here. All right, giving time, I'm going to probably zip ahead a little bit. Oh yeah, there's enough chapter here. We're not going to get through this whole thing today. We'll do another couple more paragraphs and then call it a stream. You're protecting yourself from a loss that hasn't happened, which makes complete sense, given that your entire identity is built around being needed. The idea that need might change shape feels like an existential threat. Which makes complete sense given your entire identity is built around being needed. Anything that might change that feels like an existential threat. I just trim that down a little bit. Tessa leaned back in her chair, keeping her posture open. But here's the thing about bonds. They're not a fixed resource. Marin loving Kai doesn't use up the love she has for you. It's not a tank that drains. It's more like she searched for the right image, something a phoenix would understand. Fire, Tessa said. You can light 100 candles from a single flame and the original doesn't get smaller. Salil stared at her. The glow in her plumage shifted, still dim, still uncertain, but warmer now. Again, here's three things. 1, 2, 3. Less like bank coals and more like the first light of something catching. I would trim this down. So stared at the plumage. The glow in her plumage shifted, comma, warmer now. Get rid of that. And add description. I'm undecided at the moment if I want to expand on this or just leave it at very, very simple. The glow in her plumage shifted, warmer now. I kind of lean like I want to describe that, make it a little bit more clear, warmer how. But again, from the moment, I'm going to let that sit. What if I go back to the pillow? Salil said slowly, and she tells me she'd rather I didn't. Then you'd have real information instead of a story you're telling yourself, and we'd work with that. But right now, you're grieving something that hasn't actually been taken from you. You moved to the dresser. Marin didn't move you there. I'm going to italicize that for emphasis. You moved to the dresser. Salil was quiet for a long moment. The embers had stopped falling entirely. Her plumage settled into a steady, warm amber, not the bright phoenix confidence of Phoenix at full health, but calmer than anything Tessa had seen from her in the past 3 sessions. I think I'm going to leave that as is for now. I'm going to go home tonight, Salil said, and I'm going to sleep on the pillow. How does it feel to how does that feel to think about? Terrifying, a pause, but less terrifying than the dresser. Okay, and then so this would be another thing to check. The big wrap up paragraphs when we're transitioning between beats, AI loves to tie things up in a bow. And so this is something I would probably streamline, maybe even fully cut. But we've been going for a little over an hour, so I'm not going to dig in that deep. So, this was an hour, didn't even get through a full chapter. But the reason it's taken that long is that I'm trying to explain every decision that I'm making and why I'm making it. I'm explaining, here's the text I highlighted about what the AI did that I didn't like, what it is that I didn't care for about it. If I was just to be sitting on my own working through this text, I would already be done with this whole chapter. I think when in my practice sessions using our AI tools, if I'm at this point where I have a scene card and I have generated the scene text, I can read through the text, make all of these kind of decisions I've shown off today about what I like, what I don't like, what I want to change, and why. When I'm just doing it on my own without a camera in my face for streaming, I'm not complaining. I'm just, the math is different when you're streaming it and when you're talking about it. When I am able to completely focus on the work, I can get through a chapter in 60 to 90 minutes, editing it, polishing it, and revising it to my standard. So, for me, I would consider at my experience level, my practice with it, I could get through a chapter a night. So if a book is a 25 chapter book, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, that's maybe 5 weeks and you've got a finished project. I don't advertise, anything as you're going to get a book, a perfect book in an hour or a day or any of this, get rich quick type stuff. If you want something that's going to be worth reading, you do need to exert your will on the AI. You do need to make those critical decisions, thinking through, what's good, what's not. You need to show some taste, some discernment, some directorial intent, some editorial judgment. So things do take time to, really get things to the standard you want. And that's one of the points of my whole series, is showing this off and how, and kind of helping educate folks on my thought process and how I think you get there. So anyway, that's going to conclude this week's episode. Next week, the stream is going to be on Thursday, not Friday, because I'm going to be out of the office on Friday. It's my second and final convention that I'm doing for the year. So I will be out selling books. We're going to jump to chapter 2 and do this same exercise on a fresh chapter from a different character's point of view, working through and editing the text. And then I think following episodes after that, we're going to get back into the plotting here and circle back to fleshing out the plot and making sure that things are on a good track moving forward. It is my way with these things to make sure I have prior chapters in a status that I like before moving on to the next ones, because the system will look to prior chapters for context. So, errors can compound over time if they're not corrected, and the system will look to the existing outline to explain things. So it's important to have beat cards in a good status before iterating on things from there. So anyway, that is kind of that will conclude things for this week. I want to thank folks for tuning in. Sam